Okay. And officially welcome Reverend Gregory Johnson. Greg,
Hello.
come on.
Hello, and please just call me Greg.
I'm just calling you Greg, but I wanted everyone to know that we have you with us and how important it is because of everything that you do, how you have served this world for so many years, and just how really honored we are to have you with us. So before you jump in, I'm just going to tell our audience a little bit about you so that they can actually feel as honored as we do. So Greg Johnson, founder of GJPI, considers his life in 3 acts: as a musician, international business entrepreneur, and healthcare professional through his ministry in family caregiving. He was ordained in 2002 as an interfaith minister and a family caregiver himself. Greg continues his 20 years of serving Emblem Health's Care for the Family Caregiver Initiative, along with his activities as a speaker, an author, creativity, enthusiasm, and deep vision. And with that, I will refer you to his bio that will be on the speaker's page for all of his incredible credentials and everything. But Greg is here to share with us today about freedom through forgiveness and all of his expertise and experiences working with people's hearts for many, many years. So welcome, Greg.
Marcy, it is so wonderful to be with you, and thank you, Anthony. We've not met other than to write back and forth, but it's wonderful what you are doing, and I know you've had incredible response to it as well, but my inbox has been filled, and there are many of you out there. Hello and welcome. We love you. It's absolutely wonderful from many parts of the world who were thrilled that based right here, we were doing a full day, and it was the creative genius of our wonderful Marcy. We've had the privilege of chatting before, but I was particularly excited about this topic. Yes, family caregiving has been my ministry for well over 22 years. Took me a while to get there because when you graduate in 1970 from a seminary, they weren't quite ready for an openly gay man. And so we had to work a little bit of our way, but you know, all of it was God's gift to me. There was a lot about forgiveness too, because I had to go through a great deal. But I was blessed 22 years ago to have the then chairman of the foundation of Emblem Health come to me and say, we want to bring attention to the often silent patients, the family caregivers. And I looked at him, he was a very dear friend of mine personally, and I said to him, Carl, I love the idea, but I know nothing about insurance. The only thing I know about is that as a minister, I've buried more caregivers than care recipients. Oh. And if there were something that I could do and contribute to keep caregivers caregivers and not create more care recipients, count me in. Well, little did I know the blessing that was ahead of me. Now, I have done, and you have some of the tapes for your audience members, I believe, that you're giving out later. Yeah, and you'll have the website there, because I have, in the last 3 years, spent an enormous amount of time talking to this computer, and it's been my sense of being alive, as it has been for so many of us. But when you asked about this topic, I was thrilled, because it's a topic that I get asked about privately, but very rarely publicly. And particularly the issue of, she was so awful to me all of my life, and now I got to care for her or him. I mean, you know, the gender, really, that's not the question. That takes forgiveness. And it becomes part of our journey. And I state at the beginning, there's only one rule in family caregiving, and it so parallels forgiveness. The rule in family caregiving is before I can care for you, I've got to care for myself. And within that becomes the clue. So what I want to do, if it's all right with you, and I've got my clock here, which I shall keep, because this gets me very excited, and you can tell how calm I am. But basically, I want to discuss just very quickly willingness, looking at self, two pieces of forgiveness, and then I want to walk through the methodology that I have used to help people unburden themselves and find the blessing in what seems like a curse. But to begin with, and you know me, Marcy, I am surrounded as I sit here looking at you with books. I love books, and I'm so old, I know most of the authors. And I'm beginning with two of my dearest friends. One, he is gone, but Archbishop Tutu and his daughter, Mafo, have written the most wonderful book. I have used it for years. And two people who have had endless work in the world of forgiveness. But Arch writes this in the beginning. I would like to share with you two simple truths. There is nothing that cannot be forgiven, and there is no one undeserving of forgiveness. When you can see and understand that we are all bound to one another, whether by birth, by circumstance, or simply by our shared humanity, then you will know this to be true. I have often said that in South Africa, this is Arch talking, there would have been no future without forgiveness. This is going to sound very appropriate. Our rage and our quest for revenge would have been our destruction. This is true for us individually, as it is true for us globally. Now, I share that because if we don't avail ourselves of the gift and the journey of forgiveness in a caregiving situation where you feel you are being jailed and prisoner, you are simply going to take and keep stuffing that anger and stuffing that anger. And we are physical, emotional, and spiritual human beings. And so when one thing starts, it's going to affect another. And I'm going to end up, quite frankly, with one of those caregivers I'm going to bury instead of the care recipient. And so I have been looking at this for a very long time. And I feel that the first step, and it's the one that I use with people, before we go into anything else, it's willingness. Are you willing to look at forgiveness, first for yourself and then for others? And often people will say, well, that sort of thing, and that's fine, whatever, it's a journey. So then they say to me, well, how can I do that? And I say, the only way I know how to do anything in life is to spend a little time being quiet and in prayer. Pray for the willingness. And of course, you know, I happen to have a prayer that I want to share with you. I think it's an appropriate way to begin. So wherever you are in your journey, if you're helping someone else, perhaps this may be a blessing to you. It's been one I've used many, many times in my life. And it's from A Course in Angels, and I love angels. I'm looking at a bunch of them right now. Beloved angels, please help me to see things differently, to behold the innate goodness in others, awaken to me to compassion. I'm willing to discover how to set myself free. I choose to return to love. Rather than hold on to resentment and pain, I take the first step in forgiveness and actively become willing to forgive. I surrender despite my resistance, all feelings of retaliation, revenge, or repayment. I acknowledge and accept a clearing out of the energetic ties that have bound me. I claim unconditional love as a feat of courage and empowerment. The act of forgiveness now liberates space within me and opens a portal to the divine. May it be so. And it's something we have to do more than once, unless you're extremely blessed. I can quickly revert to me. But I have found being willing to talk about willingness becomes that first step. And then when I'm willing to do that, I'm going to just share with you, Archbishop Tutu and Mafo have a 4-step program. That's what this book is entirely written and based upon. And I cannot urge it enough. By the way, I have no rights on the book or what have you. But the other one that I have with me, and you know I have talked about this, is the other one of Archbishop Tutu and the Dalai Lama, the Book of Love, the Book of Joy. And in it is an entire chapter on forgiveness, and it's just filled with things. But this book was written before. Both were written with the support of Doug Abram. And Doug also is the one who wrote the book with Jane Goodall, the Book of Hope, which has just recently come out. So you can tell I love books because I learn. And here is, now if I can find the right page, that's all right, the paperclip works. It's a 4-prong journey they suggest, and I have used it with many people. Number 1, telling the story. Tell it just as you feel it has happened. No critiquing, just tell the story. Then naming the hurt. Then granting forgiveness and renewing or releasing the relationship. So those become their suggested 4 steps, and I'm going to come back to that. But the first thing I always encourage people is to begin to look at ourselves. I have for over 30 years been in Alcoholics Anonymous, so I spend a lot of my life cleaning up my side of the street. And in order to go from being the jailer and the jailed, because that's really what, without forgiving, we're the jailer and the person jailed. Well, I want to free myself of those bonds. But it becomes a journey from ego, edging God out, to essence. And God, by the way, as you would well expect from somebody like me, as you understand that word today, or you don't understand it, we all have a place at the table in this conversation. But there are 2 pieces on forgiveness that I just want to briefly touch on, and then I'm going back to my caregivers. Number 1, I believe, and I'm sure I have not had, and I have to be honest, I have had other recordings I was doing this morning. So I've not had the blessing of hearing the previous speakers, but I look forward to doing that, as I always love to hear everything that everyone has had to say. But I'm sure that many others will share that forgiveness does not mean forgetting. We're just not made that way. And we've been telling that story for so long, it's not gonna go away. So I urge people not to get into that sort of a trap. What may, and we pray it does, is we will begin to change the story. We will begin to see into the story as we look at our part in the story and look at the one for whom we are now becoming the caregiver. That's the first piece. And the second, and this leads directly back into the caregiver, and it's something I talk about a great deal with people who come not in the caregiving part, but are just here talking to me about forgiveness. Holiday times, often people want to speak with a clergy person and talk about confession, as it were, and share their issues and to share them with another person. And I'm going to come back to that in a minute. But forgiveness does not mean fraternization. It may resolve, and the forgiving may indeed create a whole new depth of meaning. And there's a great deal in here. There's a wonderful piece in here on that section by Archbishop Tutu and the late President Botha. Now, you can't imagine 2 more people who had to keep re-evaluating their relationship. And I may be dating myself by having stated those names, but you can read and look it up. Google's still around to give you some history. But not always does fraternization come out of it. If there was abuse, if there was serious abuse, there is a time to walk away from that situation. Because you've forgiven someone doesn't mean you need to go back and live in that situation where only one half of the equation has chosen to look at itself. So those two pieces, and each of them in a series that I do on my spiritual toolkit, I literally do a program about each of them, because there is so much that there's so much within it that it allows that conversation. But I want to go back to, because our time is limited, and I want to be supportive of that situation. In this book, there are incredibly wonderful methodologies. There are things that we've all used and suggested to people. There is journaling. There are acts that you can be doing that is a physical act to reflect a spiritual being, a spiritual intent. Mafo talks about having a stone that you're moving around, and it goes from being this great burden to finally becoming a blessing as it goes through the 4 stages that they offer. This becomes a very positive statement. Also, there's a great deal of being willing, not only, and I urge people in this, to talk to therapists, talk to professionals, read. There's this whole variety. There are clergy to whom you can talk. If you're not comfortable with that, there are therapists, there are life coaches, and each one is available to you. And it can be a very strong and positive experience. Now, one of the things that I have done, and this will not particularly surprise you, as someone who has had and has the gift of being a very grateful recovering alcoholic, I love the 12 steps because they have been a pathway for sobriety, first and foremost, physical sobriety, getting sober, as it were. But I have used the 12 steps in every aspect of my life, on relationships, on finance, on retiring, because I can put things down in a concrete way. I have often said this in churches, and I sometimes get people a little shook up, but that's perfectly fine. So much of church has been about how do you worship, and for centuries they're talking about worship, worship, worship. Well, in my tradition of the Christian world, Jesus never said, worship me. The only thing he ever said was, follow me. And he told stories to help us along. Well, I believe that the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous are probably the most concrete, written down roadmap for life that I always felt I was born without. Because the first word of the 12 steps blesses us, and I use this with caregivers. We admitted. Now, I don't know about you, but for a long time, there was no we in my life. It was I, which is what most of us do in the first half of our life. And now I'm reaching for another book, but of course, Richard Rohr, Falling Upward, the first and second halves of our lives. The first is all about me. And then maybe we might get to we. And that becomes the gift. It certainly was true, both chronologically and appropriately, through the use of the 12 steps. And the first 3 steps, I'm not going through each one, but I'm using this just to guide people, is I can't, he, she, or it can, let them. That's about the easiest way to say the first 3 steps. And we're saying, I need help. Well, what is a caregiver doing? They're saying, I'm powerless over my mother, I'm powerless over my father, and my life has become unmanageable. That part is in spades. Well, the minute I hear someone saying that, whether they're using those words or not, I think, oh, good, I know where we're going here. And they've just opened the door. I remember a very famous woman here in New York came to me to talk about her husband. She was yet later to write a great book on family caregiving. But I said to her, dear, I've got the answer for you. And she said, oh, let me write it down. I said, you don't need to. You already know it. You're powerless over, put his name in there, and your life has become unmanageable. Ooh. But before we start worrying about them, let's look at our lives. And in AA, there is the fourth and the fifth steps, which is really the archway, in my opinion, to freedom. It's the difference between going to meetings and saying, oh, I didn't have a drink, to sobriety, which can be emotional, physical, spiritual sobriety. And I call it caregiving sobriety when you're dealing with this situation. Because it's taking something that was very difficult and turning it and using it. The same story you told when you were drunk, you're now telling to get well. Ooh, how powerful that can be. And so we have the fourth and fifth steps, which are very, very much like confession. And what are they? They're about our lives. They're about the things that keep going on. What is that story you keep telling about your mother? The fourth martini, and you start in on, oh, that woman, and you go on and on and on. Or your father. I had it with it was part of my journey. I'll tell you a little bit of that later. But as we begin to look at our reaction to them, our relation to them, we can also take from the wonderful world of Al-Anon, the 3 C's. I didn't cause her to be who she is. I can't control it, and I can't cure it. But I can begin to understand her as I understand me, and we will form a new relationship. It's not going to be Hallmark cards. Get over that one. And it's not going to be Disney World. But it's going to be a new relationship as two precious children of the divine who were brought together, I believe, for the opportunity to both grow. And that can be very difficult and very powerful. But what I love about walking and being honored to walk with people through the steps, and I'm just going to read a group of words. How many times have we, many of us, had people come to us? Their world is coming to an end. Everything is bad, everything is awful. They're in the most negative spot they could be. So the 12 steps asks them to write a moral inventory. Now, the first time I heard that, I thought, well, I don't know what that means. And I'll never forget, I had a wonderful sponsor who sarcastically but lovingly said to me, of course you have nothing to write down on a moral inventory, Greg. And I thought, okay. He said, picture this. It's your 5th martini. What did you talk about? Well, I had plenty, and I had pages of things to write about, because those were the things I didn't talk about except when I was drunk, or they were conversations that were constantly going in my head. So I wrote out the moral inventory. But as we go on, they ask us to look at our wrongs. By the 6 steps, it's defects of character. By the 7th step, we ask to have our shortcomings removed. Now, to take a group of ideas about ourselves or about another person that have absolutely had us jailed, and begin to look at them, and to begin to get free, to begin to be willing to look at that part and our part. This is the gift to me of using both of these possibilities as we walk into the world of forgiveness. Because once we can see our part of the street, once we can understand that nobody really was born to be miserable and awful to us. And we don't always know the whole story. In my own life, I had a father. I mean, most people do. I realized how that sounded. I had a father who had just come home from the war. That's World War II. And suddenly I came along, sort of unexpectedly. And he told me early on, and I remembered it so well, that I was a mistake and unwanted. This does not bring you into a world feeling loved. And at the same time, I had been born with a form of polio. So I was no athlete, never have been, never will be, not at 75. But music was my gift. And I was blessed to excel in that world. And so I became a very public figure. And the audience loved me. But it was later in life, to be the gift of recovery, that finally allowed me to go back and meet that little boy. And as I began to meet that little boy, I began to look at the blessings that my dad really gave me. Number one, he didn't understand me at all, and he decided just to step aside. I've often, and I say it lovingly, but I've often referred to it as, my father was sort of like Joseph of the biblical, necessary for the beginning, and then really out of the picture beyond that. Now, my mother, on the other hand, was Mama Rose, so you can tell where the show business came about. But I could be grateful. And secondly, and this I have always been grateful for, because I didn't have an earthly father. The concept of a divine being in the Midwest, yes, it would be a God figure, a father. And I was someone who was gifted with music. So I was conducting things, I was conducting choirs that I wasn't old enough to be in. And I can remember as a kid sitting there in the middle of the church all by myself, trying to figure out where to put everybody in that. And God was just as much of a presence, the divine being. We would talk, I'd say, where am I supposed to put the choir? And then alcohol began to separate that. Recovery brought that back into my life. Now, I'm not going to go into the whole story, but my father and we were together. I did the things I felt were appropriate for me. But when caregiving came about in his life, toward the end, he lived to be into his 90s, both my parents did. And my sister was the primary caregiver. And I knew that the end was near. And I had done everything to support from here, but my sister was the primary caregiver. And in fact, I had a note by each of my landline telephones that said, Kathy, my sister, is the primary caregiver. You may spend your life talking about caregiving, but when you're talking to your sister, she's the primary caregiver. And I respected it greatly. But I called her and I said, I know the end is coming soon. I've been praying on this, and I would like to have an afternoon visit with Dad. So I arranged to fly to Milwaukee and come back because I wasn't sure how anything was going to go. But I flew out, and I shall be till my dying day grateful for this because it was the gift of a long journey in forgiveness. I remember arriving, he and Mother were there in the apartment. And I said to myself, Greg, this isn't Daddy of a happy, long life together. But this is the man who was your father, is your father, and he's about to leave this world. You're a minister who's dealt with many, many veterans. You know what the issues are that have been bothering him, and he was not a man to go to a psychiatrist or anything of that nature or get therapy. And so I began visiting with him as I would with anyone that I was visiting with in a more professional clergy sense. And I said to him right at the beginning, I said, if at any point you want me to stop, tell me. I respect you. But I'm here for you. And I want to do for you what I would do for any other wonderful veteran. And we had a long, positive talk. It ended with tears. And I'm afraid I'm going there. It was his looking at me and saying, I've always loved you. It may have been only one afternoon, but I did the right thing thanks to forgiveness. And I treasure it. I left that afternoon knowing I'd never see him alive again, and returned a few weeks later to probably make the best amend I could think, and that was to bury him. I'm very grateful for that. But for that reason, the issue of forgiveness has always been very dear to my heart. It's not painting the ultimate beautiful picture, but it's allowing us to look at what happens in our lives and in the life of the other person. But it also doesn't keep us stuck there. Because as I moved deeper into love within myself, I know that the love is going into the other person. And sometimes we can't talk in words, but we can let spirit speak to spirit. That's particularly true, and it's something I talk about again a great deal, when it is in the world of dementia. A person has already begun moving to another plane. I can't pull them back, and I shouldn't. I don't want to. But my soul can speak to their soul, for the soul is eternal. It's the same thing when I visit in the hospital and I'm dealing with someone who's in a coma. And I know this works because I've had people come back and tell me pieces of information that only they could have known. I could speak to the soul by simply asking to be a vehicle. But that sort of living comes by being willing to go deep, to look at the wounds but not be stuck in them, and to frame it in a new way. And once we're at that point, here I go again, I know, with one of my books, but it's a book, these are all things that I have used to help me in my journey. The very renowned Emmett Fox has written many wonderful books, and I've been privileged to read lots of them and know a great deal of the people in that whole tradition. This is one, as you can tell, it's well used around the world, around the year with Emmett Fox. And in it, he does a section on the Lord's Prayer. And I have suggested this, I can't tell you how many times, because up to this point in our conversation, we've really been talking more about getting ourselves into the space where we're forgiving ourselves for what may have ever gone on, trying to reposition, and also trying not to create something that's not there, because that's only going to cause more pain. But as we begin to want to deal with the loved one, with the situation, whatever it is that needs forgiving, he's got a beautiful one paragraph. And I have used it, copied it, suggested it to so many people. And so I'm going to invite all of us just to listen to this and perhaps do it within our own hearts. The technique, and I'm reading from Dr. Fox, the technique of forgiveness is not very difficult when you understand how. The only thing that is essential is willingness to forgive. Provided you desire to forgive the offender, the greatest part of the work is already done. This is his suggestion. Get by yourself and become quiet. Repeat any prayer that appeals to you, or read a chapter of any book that you feel appropriate. then quietly say, I fully and freely forgive, mention the name, the situation, whatever. I lose him, her, and let them go. I cast the burden aside. He is free now, and I am free too. The truth of the Christ presence has set us both free, and I give thanks in all the names of God. Now, Emmett Fox also says, and this goes back to the earlier point, when you do such a prayer, don't repeat it. You have done it this time. Now, it's going to come back to you, isn't it? The thought, the person, you'll see them. The emotions will come back. What do? He suggests, and I do as well. Bless them, bless the situation, and send them on the way. I don't invite them back in. I have forgiven. And the truth is, as time goes on, it begins to fade. There will be moments when it will come back because it's only human. But we don't need to take it back in and live in it. So that, my dear Marcy, has been my suggestions when it comes, and I've been very specific talking about the caregivers, but it is so difficult. And once they have learned and experienced the gift of forgiveness, suddenly that person, that issue, which seems so controlling, can be the gift that allows us to use exactly what the theme is today. Forgive, live, and be free.
For
And
sure.
I'd like just to end my portion with one more brief reading. It's from a book that's dear to my heart. After my late husband died, I wrote a book because there was none available to caregivers that were not of any specific theological background, and I'm much more an interfaith minister. And so with Reverend Marion Gambardella, who had been very much one of the leading partners of Unity, and Dr. Eric Butterworth here in New York, we did a book entitled Peace Be Still. And I'd like to just end my portion by the prayer, obviously entitled Forgiveness. Oh, Father God, oh, Mother God, I ask your divine help. I want to forgive and move on, but resentments, anger, and prejudiced injustices will not leave me. There are times when I seem unable to rise above my own feelings. Help me not to judge myself or others. Give me willingness to accept that I feel hurt, wounded, and resentful. I surrender each feeling, every resentment, and each thought of anger and pain to you. I am overwhelmed to feel your love. You do not judge my humanity and weakness. You make life perfect in my weakness. You make my life holy and truly whole. Give me wisdom to see my part in each issue, perhaps with the guidance of a trusted friend, a therapist, a clergy person. Teach me the lessons in my feelings that I may grow and be strengthened. I now give thanks for these feelings. In each challenge, I see you. I see your solution and your presence, and I rejoice. Now I breathe in your love, your grace, your willingness, and your peace. I go on strengthened, renewed, and blessed. Lord, make me a blessing to those who seem a burden, a difficulty, a challenge. Grant this, that I may witness your love always. And it is so. Amen.
Amen. Well,
Thank you.
thank you so much, Greg. And I'd like actually to open this up to questions because we don't have much time left. And also to see if Anthony would like to add anything from his perspective. But does anyone have any questions? Any questions or comments about what Greg has shared? I know he's given us an awful lot of food for thought. We've heard about the 12 steps. We've heard from different spiritual leaders and what their recommendations are for forgiveness and how to walk through that journey in a way that we're finding it for ourselves, and so much diversity, and yet it all comes down to the same thing, and that is our willingness to choose that path. Anthony, did you have anything that you wanted to add?
Well, there was so much that Greg talked about that I can resonate with and was in alignment with. But I especially love the prayer at the end from his book on forgiveness, because he asked God, Father, Mother, God, for forgiveness, even though I still find that there's resentment and anger and hurt. And that's what I think some people really need to grasp hold of, that forgiveness doesn't happen overnight. And sometimes it's a long process and journey of working through all these other emotions and feelings that go along with the process of the forgiving, or the wounds or the hurt that we've incurred from others or experiences with others. So sometimes we even think we might be over something. Oh, I've forgiven that person. But then boom, something comes along and we realize, oh my God, there's still this anger or this hurt that is aligned with whenever I think of that person or see that person. And that's when I think, again, the moment of self-forgiveness needs to come into play, of that, okay, my heart wasn't fully ready for the full opening at that time. Because some people just tell us, oh, just forgive, forget, get over it, let it go. But it's not always that simple. Mm-hmm. And so there is a process that comes along with it. So I love the prayer included, please help me to forgive, because there's still all these other feelings that are still coming along with that. And just know that it is a process, and it happens when it happens, like it might not be a day or a week or a month. It might be years before those wounds are typically healed. So thank you so much, Greg, for everything that you did share today.
Well, thank you so much. It's been such a joy. And I agree, we are works in progress.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm perfectly imperfect.
Me too.
And the younger I get. No, it's so true. But you're absolutely right. All of a sudden, something will come up and you'll say, I thought I took care of that.
Yeah.
But it's that gift of going yet deeper.
Yeah. I was so moved also, and I want to thank you, Greg, for bringing up the deathbed forgiveness. That very often we find ourselves facing, right? So we've been carrying this baggage, these grudges, this unforgiven energy for a long time. And then we're faced with the death of someone who has caused us a lot of pain and suffering that we've taken on during our lives, right? From different interactions and experiences. And here we are faced with this possibility of, forgiving and letting it go. And I know for myself, it's happened for me a couple of times. And there was one time where I chose not to be part of that deathbed forgiveness ritual. And it was because I wasn't ready. Mm-hmm. I wasn't ready to say, I forgive you for that. And for the longest time, I wondered if I should feel guilt over that, but I didn't feel guilty. I felt like I was really being true to myself and holding space for myself.
Marcy, you seem to have frozen.
Frozen, yeah. I'm getting the same.
And I know nothing about technology other than I got on.
Yeah, it has to be her end.
But she brings up a very good point there. And the gift, because I've certainly dealt with it with people in the caregiving world and in 12-step work, sponsees and that sort of, and spiritual directees. Um, there are ways, and you would certainly know it, Anthony, of being able to deal with that at a later point.
Right.
Through writing letters, reading them, burning them after you've read them, all that sort of thing. And there are many ways. I'm a great believer in it, and it just works for me, that to do something physical about something that is mental and emotional makes it very concrete for me.
Right. Yes.
And so that's what I was thinking as I heard her. Now, she will be back, I'm sure.
Yes, she will. But while we are waiting for her, I believe that there is one other wonderful point that you brought up early in your talk, Greg, and that was about forgiving and forgetting.
Yeah.
Because there are so many times in my life where people said to me, "Oh, just forgive and forget, just forgive and forget." But sometimes if we go with the forgetting part, we're setting ourselves up for maybe being hurt, used, or taken advantage of again. And if sometimes it's very wise to not forget, because as you also said, if we're only the ones being aware of ourselves, if we're only the ones trying to heal ourselves, if we're only the ones working on ourselves, and that person that we're forgetting hasn't done any of that, then they're going to be living in the same patterns and the same things. And if they've hurt us prior and not done any work to try and change that, and we forget and just let them back into our lives continually, they're just going to continually hurt us again.
And that's a perfect example of fraternization.
Yes.
Where,
yes.
No, you're absolutely right. The only thing I ever feel about that aspect is I want to constantly ask myself, what upset me about that? Why is it coming back to me? What haven't I learned out of that?
Right.
I mean, I'm old enough to know that I'm being given the gift of a lesson.
Right.
I mean, it takes a while to catch on to that one, but but it makes a huge difference.
Absolutely. Yeah, I've hit myself over the head a few times before I've asked that question of myself.
That's the gift of getting younger.
Yeah.
Oh, I love it. Well, I'm very bless Marcy's heart. Is this the first time that's happened?
It is. During this recording, it's the first time it's happened. But maybe she has a storm or some sort of, she is in northern Florida, and it's about that time where there might be some thunderstorms or something coming through.
Yes.
So I just hope it hasn't knocked out her power too long. But she's here, I think.
Marcy Neumann is the host
now. There she is. Welcome back, Marcy. You're muted. Marcy, you're muted.
That was a big surprise. So I was just texting you, Anthony. Carry on.
We were.
Tanya James is next, and we'll go from there. But yeah, so that was pretty funny. But we were talking about the deathbed forgiveness opportunity that many of us are faced with. Do we participate in that, or do we not? For myself, like I said, I knew I wasn't ready. I knew that if I continued with my forgiveness work internally, that I would be supporting that process in both of us, whether they were in body, out of body. But a lot of people are faced with this decision. Can you please talk about that?
Well, you can listen to the recording, dear, because that's what I used
to
fill in the blank.
Perfect.
We spoke about the ability to find the closure at the time that you're ready. And I was suggesting with Anthony the many physical things that one can do, of writing a letter, of reading a letter, burning that letter after you've done it, all those sorts of things that allow you to move forward. And to bring, I never like that word closure, because I don't believe in closure. It's been part of my life. I simply say I make the circle wider, and I can accept the pain and everything that's been part of making me who I am. That's my non-dualistic thinking there. But but I just make the circle wider. It's been part of my life. It's part of who I am. And I did what I thought was right at that time. So I think that's maybe helpful.
No, I'm sure it is to a lot of people. Because it's a challenging thing. I think a lot of people also believe that that's their last chance, right? That they won't have another chance to heal this issue. And I think what's so important is for us to let everyone know that healing is infinite, right? It doesn't have a beginning and end, and that our relationships, our experiences with each other are on a continuum. And so we're never, ever, ever without that opportunity to heal relationships, and most importantly, to heal those aspects of ourselves that we're not ready, right, to extend that love and that forgiveness.
And that's so true, Marcy. And it's one of the Barbara Crafton, whom I've introduced you to, talks a great deal about this in her brilliant writings. But time is a human condition.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
We're the only ones who talk about things being before grandma died or after she died, or everything's based around, or when I went to New York, or I went here, or I went to whatever. Time is what we deal with.
Yeah,
it is, and that's the difference in timing. And when we can get more into that sort of thinking, then we can begin to see it's a much bigger world.
yeah.
And each person can be a blessing in our lives.
Yes.
I believe every person in every situation that I'm confronted with has been put there because there's something I'm supposed to learn.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
And I need to remember that.
Yeah.
I've been blessed to travel the world. I live in Bali as well, when I could travel there. At the moment, I'm not walking too well, but we will. But I remember something very important. The longest, and so I have been 150, 200 times around the world in airplanes. But the longest journey in my life was from here to here.
Yes.
And I am so grateful for that. And that's why I want to keep falling upward.
Correct. Yeah. Chris Newby made a comment in our chat. Looking at these challenges as teaching moments is so important.
Yes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's probably the gift, right, that we have the ability to receive and to give.
That's right. And we don't need to get an A on the report card.
That's right. That's right.
I have been one of those high achievers in my life, and that was a huge thing to learn.
Sure.
It isn't right or wrong. I mean, there's the dualistic thinking. I need to experience it.
That's right.
Sometimes I'll do it successfully, other times it will be less than successful. But I will end with this. I can be like Kitty Carlisle when I go home at night and I look in the mirror. Kitty used to do this all the time and say, well, I tried my best. I'll try more tomorrow.
Perfect. So perfect. And with that, we will say goodbye. And thank you so much for being here. It's been absolutely wonderful.
It was marvelous. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony, and onward.
Yes, correct. So we do have Tanya James here with us. And Tanya, before we jump in, we're going to take a quick break. Anthony, if I lose power again, because I am going to, right now I'm on my hotspot. And
Okay.
I'm going to try to come in on Wi-Fi again. All right. So we'll be back in, looks like 3 minutes. Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.